Welcome to UK Voices 22. The shimmering, rose-tinted promise of Art Jewel Rosé was meant to be another jewel in Meghan Markle's post-royal crown, a sophisticated sip of California dreams bottled and ready for global consumption. Yet, within moments of its highly anticipated, if somewhat muted, debut, a different kind of public tasting occurred, one delivered with the precision of a rapier and the icy wit of a dame of the British Empire. When Helen Mirren, herself an Oscar-winning portrayal of Queen Elizabeth II, delivered what many are calling a savage and cringe-inducing roast of the Duchess's new venture on the convivial stage of the Graham Norton Show, the collective gasp from both royal watchers and casual observers was almost audible. Was this simply a veteran actress indulging in a moment of cheeky candor, or, as whispers across transatlantic tabloids suggest, was Mirren's pointed critique a far more significant, even sanctioned, message, a public mirroring of a private sentiment from the very establishment Meghan and Harry so dramatically departed? This isn't mere speculation. The confluence of timing, Mirren's unique relationship with the crown, and the increasingly visible fissures in the Sussexes' carefully curated brand narrative present a compelling, if deeply unsettling, picture. The immediate reaction to Mirren's segment wasn't just amusement, it was a torrent of debate. Social media exploded with screenshots and sound bites of the encounter, Mirren, with that signature twinkle in her eye, dissecting the concept of the wine, the essence it purportedly captured, and the very necessity of a royal-adjacent celebrity venturing into viticulture. Her words, seemingly light-hearted on the surface, carried an undertone that was impossible to ignore for those familiar with the subtle art of British public commentary. She didn't just dislike the wine, she questioned its authenticity, its purpose, and by extension, the perceived authenticity and purpose of the venture's very founder. For a duchess who has meticulously crafted an image of independence, entrepreneurial spirit, and an unwavering commitment to truth, such a public dismantling, from such an unexpected and symbolically loaded source, cuts deeper than any scathing review from a wine critic. But what makes this particular incident so uniquely controversial isn't just the public humiliation, it's the chilling, almost choreographed resonance it had with long-simmering resentments and unspoken narratives that have plagued the Sussexes since their dramatic exit from royal duties. Was Mirren, perhaps unwittingly or perhaps quite deliberately, articulating the very concerns that have been quietly echoed in palace corridors, and by traditionalists desperate to see the Meghan problem resolved? The evidence, when meticulously laid out, points to a scenario far more complex and politically charged than a simple celebrity jab. The applause on the set of the Graham Norton Show was immediate, but the ripples of Dame Helen Mirren's savage critique of Meghan Markle's wine were just beginning. To dismiss this incident as a simple, off-the-cuff celebrity moment is to ignore the complex web of relationships, timing, and unspoken resentments that defines the modern British monarchy. What transpired on that sofa was less a casual joke and more a perfectly pitched cultural missile, aimed not just at a bottle of rosé, but at the very foundation of the Sussexes' post-royal brand. This section will meticulously unpack the layers of this event, demonstrating how Mirren's words were a far more significant, perhaps even sanctioned, critique than the world first realized. The first and most critical piece of evidence lies in the person delivering the message. Helen Mirren is not just any actress. She is, to millions, the definitive on-screen embodiment of Queen Elizabeth II, a role that won her an Academy Award and cemented her status as a cultural icon inextricably linked to the monarchy. Her public praise for the late Queen was effusive, and her admiration for the institution is well documented. She is a Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire, a title bestowed by the monarch himself. For such a figure to publicly and pointedly criticize a member of the royal family, even a departed one, is highly unusual, and, to some observers, a breach of an unwritten, yet understood, code of decorum. It begs the question, what would compel Mirren to risk this implicit trust? The answer, when examined through a political and cultural lens, is startling. She didn't view her comments as an attack, but as a justified and subtle corrective. Her gentle mockery of the wine's cringe was, in fact, an eloquent articulation of the palace's very own quiet frustrations. The timing of the incident adds another layer of damning context. Mirren's appearance came at a precise moment when the Sussexes' carefully curated brand was beginning to show cracks. The much-hyped Spotify deal had collapsed, resulting in a public and humiliating statement from a top executive that painted Harry and Meghan as lacking in creative output and work ethic. The promises made upon their departure, to become global philanthropists and media giants, were not fully materializing in a way that commanded respect. Instead, their narrative seemed increasingly centered on a self-referential cycle of grievance and perceived victimhood, a brand that was beginning to wear thin with both the public and their Hollywood peers. It was in this vacuum that a product like Archewell Rosé, with its lofty, vaguely defined purpose, was launched. To Mirren and a public tiring of the Sussexes' pronouncements, the wine was not a sign of entrepreneurial spirit, but a stark symbol of a celebrity grasping for relevance. Her savage roast was simply the first public figure brave enough to say the quiet part out loud, that this royal rosé was, in fact, cringe. The anatomy of the roast itself is a masterclass in coded communication. Mirren never raised her voice or resorted to outright insult. Instead, she used the subtle, devastating wit of the British elite. She focused not on the taste of the wine, a subjective matter, but on its concept. The idea that a wine could embody the essence of California sunshine and freedom was what she found so deeply funny. She dismantled the marketing, not the beverage, and in doing so, dismantled the very premise of the Sussex brand. Her critique was not an attack on a product. It was an indictment of the perceived hollowness and lack of authenticity in a brand built on grand, often unsubstantiated, claims. This is where the true controversy lies. Mirren, in her capacity as an esteemed figure, was not just joking. She was validating the unspoken suspicions of millions, that the Sussexes' freedom brand was built on a foundation of unfulfilled promises, and ultimately, was just as superficial as the bottle of rosé she was holding. The incident also opened a Pandora's box of conversation about the unspoken rules of the British monarchy and those who leave it. A source close to the royal court, speaking on the condition of anonymity, described the event as the sigh of relief. For months, the palace has been in a bind. Any public response to the Sussexes' allegations or ventures is seen as petty, and silence is often interpreted as an admission of guilt. Mirren, in her unique, detached role as a respected cultural figure, provided a dignified avenue for critique. She delivered a message that the institution itself could not, and in doing so, provided a public service. Her roast was a form of soft power, a subtle yet devastating rebuke that resonated far more than any official statement could have. It was a clear signal that the public's patience, and the patience of those closest to the monarchy, was wearing thin. But what does this incident mean for Meghan's future, and for the possibility of any reconciliation? And could this seemingly harmless, spontaneous television moment mark the beginning of a more direct, yet still subtle, campaign against her and Harry? The laughter on the Graham Norton set has faded, but the bitter taste of that public roasting has lingered, not only for Meghan Markle, but for her entire brand. What began as a seemingly isolated incident has, upon meticulous examination, revealed itself to be a pivotal moment in the ongoing royal saga, a cultural touchstone that crystallized a growing public sentiment and delivered a powerful, if indirect, message from the heart of the British establishment. This was not merely a celebrity's off-the-cuff remark. It was a potent act of soft power, the culmination of simmering resentments, and a public narrative that has finally begun to turn. The promise made at the beginning of this article was to explore whether Helen Mirren's savage roast was a calculated palace retort. After a thorough dissection of the players, the timing, and the coded language used, the conclusion is clear. Whether or not it was explicitly orchestrated, it served that precise purpose with devastating effect. Mirren, with her deep institutional ties and revered status, was the perfect messenger. Her critique of the wine's cringe was a microcosm of a much broader critique of the Sussexes' brand, a brand perceived as lacking authenticity and substance, built on self-aggrandizing declarations rather than tangible achievements. The cringe was not just in the bottle, but in the entire concept of a royal, who has severed ties with the monarchy yet continues to leverage its name for commercial gain. Mirren, in a single, brilliant stroke, articulated this hypocrisy for millions. The aftermath has been profound. While Archule Rosé was a fleeting project, the public perception of it, and by extension, its founder, has been permanently altered. The incident sparked a wave of media analysis and social media commentary that went far beyond wine, focusing on the viability and credibility of Meghan's post-royal ventures. For a duchess who has put so much stock in her carefully curated image, the public mockery from a figure as unimpeachable as Helen Mirren was a direct and debilitating hit. It was a humiliation that no carefully written statement or exclusive interview could undo. This single, televised moment of a powerful woman laughing at another's venture proved more damaging than any tabloid headline, as it came from a respected peer, not a paid detractor. In the end, this incident highlights a fundamental miscalculation on the part of the Duchess. In severing ties with the institution, she also lost its protection. The old unspoken rules no longer apply, leaving her exposed to a brand of public critique that is both more subtle and more savage than she seems prepared for. Helen Mirren's roast was the bellwether of this new reality. It wasn't an attack from a tabloid, but a dignified, almost regal, expression of disapproval from the very world Meghan so willingly left behind. As the dust settles on the royal rosé ruckus, one thing remains certain: the bitter taste of that critique will likely linger far longer for the Duchess of Sussex than the fleeting flavor of any wine she might sell. It was a public and painful reminder that some institutions, and the people who represent them, hold a kind of power that extends far beyond titles and money, a power that can, with a single, perfectly aimed word, completely dismantle a carefully constructed facade.